Welcome to USA Report. The moment the Guthrie family appeared on screen again, something felt unmistakably different. Not in what they said, but in how they carried themselves. As if the air around them had thickened with information they could not fully share, and that tension hit before a single word was processed. In body language analysis, the first few seconds often tell the truest story, and here, the stillness was louder than any plea, the kind of controlled composure that usually follows contact, not uncertainty, suggesting this was no longer a family speaking into the void, but a family responding to something real. Subscribe my channel, like this video, and watch full. What stood out immediately was the absence of exaggerated emotion, a detail that many casual viewers might overlook, but analysts rarely ignore. There were no frantic gestures, no uncontrolled expressions, no outward collapse. Instead, there was restraint, the kind that often signals strategy rather than spontaneity. When people know they are being watched by someone specific, especially someone they believe may respond again, their behavior tightens, their movements become deliberate, and their words are chosen not just for meaning, but for consequence. Eye focus played a critical role here. Rather than scanning or drifting, their gaze remained forward, anchored, almost disciplined. This type of sustained eye line often indicates rehearsal, but not in a deceptive sense, in a protective one. It suggests the speakers were acutely aware that every micro-expression could be interpreted, replayed, and analyzed, not just by the public, but by the recipient of the message they were addressing indirectly. Posture also revealed layers beneath the surface. Shoulders were held firm, not slumped, signaling resolve rather than defeat. Yet there was visible tension in the neck and jaw, subtle tightening that often accompanies suppressed anxiety. This combination, upright posture with localized tension, commonly appears when individuals are trying to project strength while internally managing fear, a psychological balancing act frequently observed in high-stakes appeals. One of the most telling elements was timing. Pauses between phrases were slightly longer than natural conversational rhythm, indicating conscious pacing. In body language terms, this often reflects internal monitoring, speakers checking themselves, regulating emotion, and ensuring alignment with a broader strategy. This wasn't a raw, emotional outburst. It was a calibrated communication, likely crafted with guidance and intent. Hand movement, or rather the lack of it, deserves attention. Hands remain mostly still, controlled, close to the body. In moments of uncontrolled emotion, hands tend to move freely. Still hands often suggest caution, awareness, and the presence of external stakes. It aligns with the idea that this message wasn't just for the public's comfort, but for someone whose reaction mattered deeply. From an analytical standpoint, the overall presentation signals a shift in the case's emotional phase. This no longer looks like a family pleading for attention. It looks like a family responding to engagement. And that distinction changes everything, because when communication is acknowledged, even indirectly, it introduces a new layer of psychological dynamics. Hope mixed with risk, strategy mixed with vulnerability, that will shape every move going forward. As the message unfolded, what became increasingly striking was not the content itself, but the emotional discipline wrapped tightly around every word. A discipline that rarely appears unless speakers believe their message is being actively evaluated by someone beyond the audience. In body language analysis, this level of control often signals perceived proximity to consequence, meaning the speakers are no longer addressing an abstract hope, but a tangible possibility. The Guthrie family's delivery suggested they were acutely aware that tone, pacing, and facial tension could influence an outcome, not just sympathy. Vocal tone deserves particular attention here. The pitch remained steady, slightly lower than typical conversational speech, which psychologists associate with attempts to convey seriousness and credibility rather than desperation. There were no sharp spikes or tremors, even when emotionally loaded phrases appeared. This absence of vocal instability often indicates rehearsed composure. But more importantly, it reflects an effort to avoid provoking or alarming whoever may be listening beyond the camera. Micro-expressions revealed subtle cracks beneath that composure. Brief tightening around the eyes, fleeting jaw clenching, and controlled exhalations point to stress being actively managed rather than absent. These micro-movements typically occur when individuals are suppressing fear or urgency to maintain a calm external signal. In high-risk communications, especially those involving potential captors, calmness is often used as a tool to de-escalate and maintain connection. The phrase acknowledging receipt of a message carried disproportionate psychological weight, not because of what it said explicitly, but because of what it implied implicitly. In communication theory, acknowledgement is a powerful act. It confirms a channel is open. Body language reflected this shift. shoulders subtly squared, posture slightly forward, as if addressing a known listener rather than an unknown audience. This posture change suggests engagement, not outreach. Another important detail lies in facial symmetry. Throughout the message, expressions remained balanced, avoiding exaggerated asymmetry that often appears when emotions overwhelm control. Balanced expressions are commonly associated with intentional signaling, especially when speakers want to appear stable, rational, and trustworthy. This again supports the interpretation that the family was not merely expressing grief, but strategically communicating under perceived observation. The pacing of speech reinforced this impression. Words were spaced carefully, with deliberate pauses that allowed meaning to settle without escalating emotion. Such pacing is often coached in negotiation contexts, where clarity and restraint are prioritized over emotional release. Whether consciously or intuitively, the family's delivery mirrored techniques designed to keep communication channels open rather than inflame them. Taken together, these signals suggest a profound psychological transition in the narrative. The family no longer appears trapped in uncertainty. Instead, they appear cautiously responsive, operating under the belief that their actions now carry direct weight. This doesn't confirm outcomes, but it confirms engagement. And in cases like this, engagement reshapes every emotional and strategic calculation that follows. As the message continued, stillness itself became one of the loudest signals, because in moments of extreme uncertainty, the human body almost always betrays internal chaos through movement. Yet here, movement was deliberately minimized. This kind of physical restraint is rarely accidental. In body language analysis, stillness under stress often indicates one of two things: either emotional shutdown or conscious control. In this case, the facial engagement, eye focus, and vocal steadiness rule out shutdown, leaving intentional regulation as the dominant explanation. The family's breathing patterns offered another layer of insight. Breaths were shallow but controlled, taken at natural sentence breaks rather than during emotional peaks. This pattern suggests active self-regulation, a technique commonly used when speakers are trying to prevent emotional escalation. Unregulated breathing often leads to vocal tremors and rushed speech, neither of which appeared here. Instead, the breathing supported composure, reinforcing the impression that calm was not natural in this moment. It was chosen. Eye contact dynamics further reinforced this interpretation. There was minimal blinking during key phrases, a sign often associated with heightened cognitive load and concentration. Reduced blinking typically appears when individuals are monitoring themselves closely or when they believe precision matters. This aligns with the idea that the message was not only emotional, but strategic, crafted with the awareness that misinterpretation could have real-world consequences. Another telling element was facial neutrality during emotionally charged statements. Rather than allowing expressions to fully mirror sentiment, the family maintained a controlled facial baseline, allowing only brief flashes of emotion to surface before being restrained again. This suppression does not signal a lack of feeling, it signals prioritization. When people believe emotional display could jeopardize an outcome, they often sacrifice authenticity for stability. The body alignment of the speakers also deserves attention. They remained oriented squarely toward the camera, without leaning away or shifting weight excessively. Squared alignment typically conveys directness and sincerity. But in this context, it also suggests readiness, as if the speakers were positioning themselves for continued interaction rather than a one-way broadcast. This orientation subtly transforms the message from a plea into a dialogue, even if the response remains unseen. Importantly, there was no visible sign of performative grief. Performative grief often includes exaggerated facial expressions, dramatic pauses, or overt physical cues designed to evoke sympathy. Its absence here suggests the family's priority was not public emotion, but message integrity. This choice indicates a belief that credibility and calm may be more persuasive than raw emotion in this specific moment. All of these elements point toward a crucial psychological conclusion. The family appears to believe that observation is active. Whether that belief is accurate or not is secondary to the fact that it shapes behavior. When people feel observed by someone who holds power over an outcome, their body language shifts from expressive to controlled, from outward-facing to inward-regulated. And once that shift occurs, the entire dynamic of the situation enters a new, more fragile phase, one where every signal matters. What becomes impossible to ignore at this stage is the synchronization between the speakers, because human beings rarely align unconsciously under stress, unless there is a shared internal framework guiding them. The pacing, pauses, and emotional restraint appeared harmonized rather than coincidental, suggesting either extensive rehearsal or a strong mutual understanding of what must and must not be expressed. This kind of synchronization often emerges when individuals feel the weight of consequence and instinctively prioritize collective control over personal expression. Micro-expressions briefly surfaced during transitions between speakers, fleeting moments where facial muscles softened or tightened before returning to neutrality. These moments are critical because they tend to appear when cognitive responsibility shifts. The brief tightening of the jaw or narrowing of the eyes suggests mental recalibration rather than emotional collapse, indicating that each speaker was acutely aware of their role and timing. This is not casual communication, it is situational awareness made visible. The absence of overlapping speech is another subtle but telling detail. In emotionally charged family messages, people often interrupt or echo one another unconsciously, driven by shared urgency. Here, turn-taking was clean and deliberate, reinforcing the impression of structure. Such restraint usually appears when speakers believe clarity outweighs emotional amplification, a belief often shaped by external advice or a perceived need to maintain authority and credibility. Hand positioning remained consistently neutral, avoiding both clenched fists and open palm gestures. Clenched fists would signal contained anger or fear, while open palms often signal appeal or vulnerability. Choosing neutrality instead suggests a desire to neither escalate nor plead. This balanced positioning places the message in a psychological middle ground, firm enough to be taken seriously, restrained enough to avoid misinterpretation. The group's collective posture also conveyed a quiet form of endurance. Shoulders remained level, spines upright but not rigid, signaling sustained effort rather than collapse. This posture communicates persistence, the kind that says the situation is ongoing and unresolved, but not yet lost. In body language terms, this is the posture of individuals who believe time still matters. Another critical signal lies in how emotion was distributed rather than concentrated. No single individual carried the full emotional burden of the message. Instead, emotional weight was evenly shared, reducing the risk of any one speaker appearing overwhelmed. This distribution is often intentional in high-stakes communication, designed to prevent emotional fracture and preserve overall message stability. Taken together, these signals suggest a family operating not just from grief but from strategy. Strategy does not negate sincerity, it reframes it. When people believe their behavior could influence an outcome, instinct pushes them toward control, alignment, and restraint. And that belief alone, whether justified or not, fundamentally reshapes how a message is delivered and how it should be interpreted by anyone watching closely. As the video progressed, one of the most striking aspects was the deliberate withholding of emotion at key moments, a phenomenon that often surprises casual viewers, but is loaded with meaning in high-stakes communication. The family's faces, while expressive enough to convey seriousness, avoided overt displays of panic or despair. This restraint is a strategic choice. When emotions are withheld, it communicates control and stability, signaling to the unseen recipient that the speakers are conscious, composed, and responsive, not desperate or reactive. The pauses between phrases were carefully measured, and these silences spoke as loudly as the words themselves. In body language analysis, silence can serve multiple functions. It can allow information to be absorbed, create tension, or signal anticipation. Here, the timing suggested both anticipation and control, a subtle attempt to manage perception while signaling attentiveness to whoever may be monitoring the message. Each pause was a calculated breath, maintaining suspense without losing composure. Facial micro-movements further revealed a delicate balance between authenticity and strategy. A brief tightening of the lips, a subtle lift of an eyebrow, a fleeting softening around the eyes, these tiny cues suggested internal emotion being tempered for public delivery. These micro-expressions are not easily fabricated. They are the body's natural attempts to reveal feeling while still maintaining intentional control. And in this context, they highlight the family's acute awareness of stakes. The distribution of gaze between speakers and the camera reinforced a sense of unity and shared responsibility. No one looked away or sought validation from the other in a way that suggested uncertainty. Instead, each maintained a consistent forward focus, signaling readiness and cohesion. This alignment of attention is often a subconscious strategy when individuals want to present as united and deliberate, creating an impression of authority and mutual understanding to the observer. Hand gestures, though minimal, were purposeful. When movement occurred, it aligned with specific words, emphasizing meaning without inviting distraction. In negotiation and high-risk communication, hands that underscore points rather than wander communicate credibility and precision. These gestures function as subtle markers of intent, reinforcing that the family's appeal is considered rather than spontaneous, a critical distinction for anyone analyzing potential psychological cues in a crisis. Another revealing element was the group's subtle synchronization of breathing and posture, almost imperceptible but detectable to trained observers. Breathing in unison, shoulders rising and falling at similar intervals, and maintaining balanced stance all point to collective emotional regulation. This synchronization is rarely coincidental. It emerges when individuals share not only experience but strategy, consciously or unconsciously, signaling solidarity while keeping the emotional tone calibrated. Overall, these patterns of restrained emotion, deliberate pauses, micro-expressions, and synchronized posture combine to produce a message that is far more than words on screen. The family's communication suggests a calculated balance between conveying urgency and maintaining composure, a balance that indicates both awareness of an unseen audience and the understanding that their actions now carry psychological weight. This is a family not just speaking, but negotiating the emotional terrain of hope, fear, and strategy simultaneously. As the video reached its conclusion, the subtle tension embedded throughout became most evident in the final seconds, where lingering eye contact and measured posture communicated an unspoken message: readiness without panic, awareness without aggression. In body language terms, this is a peak moment of controlled signaling, the kind of nonverbal communication that often conveys more than words ever could, suggesting the family understands the gravity of the situation and the delicacy required in their public appeal. The closing tone was equally revealing, the slight modulation of pitch and careful spacing of words signaling both deference and determination. Vocal nuances like this are rarely accidental. They demonstrate cognitive processing under pressure and awareness that tone can influence perception. In high-stakes messaging, these minute shifts are crucial, allowing the speakers to project seriousness while subtly managing how their sincerity and urgency are interpreted by both observers and intended recipients. Hand positioning in the final moments returned to strict neutrality, emphasizing stability. The hands remained visible, yet contained, neither gesturing broadly nor collapsing in nervousness. Analysts would interpret this as a conscious choice to avoid vulnerability cues, projecting an image of composure that supports credibility. It's a delicate dance between showing emotion enough to convey authenticity while restraining it enough to avoid exposing weakness, an approach frequently observed in crisis communication. The interplay of facial tension and relaxation also offers insight. Brief moments of softening around the eyes were carefully balanced against tightened jawlines and firm brow lines, creating a rhythm of controlled emotion. This subtle fluctuation communicates engagement and attentiveness while avoiding overwhelming emotional display, indicating that the family's approach is deliberate, psychologically calibrated, and strategically mindful of the unseen audience. Shared body language cues remained consistent through the closing frames, reinforcing a sense of unity. Shoulders aligned, posture mirrored, and synchronized breathing created a visual cohesion that conveys collective resilience. Observers trained in nonverbal analysis recognize this as a mechanism for reinforcing group identity and solidarity, sending the subconscious message that the family is coordinated, alert, and emotionally synchronized in their response. Perhaps the most significant aspect of the final segment is what is left unsaid, a silence that communicates nearly as much as the spoken words. The absence of exaggerated emotional peaks, the restraint in gestures, and the careful pacing together form a controlled narrative, a signal that the family is present, engaged, and monitoring, but also mindful of the potential consequences of miscommunication. Silence here is not emptiness, it is strategic weight, a subtle form of psychological negotiation. Taken together, the Guthrie family's latest message, when analyzed through body language, vocal modulation, posture, and synchronized restraint, paints a picture of strategic emotional management. It suggests a family balancing hope and fear, expressing awareness of stakes without relinquishing composure, and delivering a message calibrated for impact both on the unseen recipient and the public watching. Every movement, pause, and expression carries weight. And understanding this subtle choreography is essential to interpreting the full narrative beyond words. A narrative of careful control, enduring concern, and deeply human strategy. Even after the words concluded, the residual tension lingered in the family's posture and expressions, a subtle reminder that the message was not just about communication, but about control. Control over narrative, over perception, and most critically, over how the unseen listener might interpret each gesture. The way shoulders shifted, heads tilted slightly in unison, and eyes subtly scanned the room all suggest vigilance. They were not just speaking, they were sending signals to a presence outside the frame, shaping perception even in silence. The timing of glances and micropauses is equally telling, revealing a rhythm that suggests internal coordination. Each family member allowed the other to lead, then followed seamlessly, an unconscious choreography of alignment that communicates solidarity. In high-stakes situations, this type of synchronized behavior is rarely accidental. It functions as reassurance for both the group and any external observer, signaling cohesion, composure, and a shared understanding of the stakes. Facial microexpressions continue to convey layered emotion beneath the controlled surface. A barely perceptible tightening around the lips, a flicker of tension in the forehead, a softening of the eyes for a moment. All of these are windows into internal stress being carefully managed. These subtle cues hint at the emotional load each person is carrying, even as they maintain an outwardly composed exterior, and they are precisely the kind of signals experts look for when analyzing the authenticity of high-pressure messages. Hands, once again, played a critical role in maintaining equilibrium. Minimal gestures, mostly resting or lightly clasped, indicate deliberate suppression of anxiety or impulsivity. The choice to limit hand movement conveys awareness that every micro-movement could be scrutinized, interpreted, or misread. In psychological terms, this restraint is a form of self-regulation, allowing the family to maintain authority in presentation while communicating urgency without panic. Vocal cadence remained a key instrument of controlled communication. The deliberate pacing, slight emphasis on certain words, and careful modulation of volume and pitch suggest the speakers were consciously shaping how their words would land. In essence, the vocal patterns become a secondary layer of body language, reinforcing visual signals and subtly guiding how the message is received. Every pause, every emphasis serves as both punctuation and signal, creating rhythm that conveys composure under pressure. Postural alignment between family members was remarkably consistent, reinforcing the impression of strategic unity. Each individual's stance mirrored the others in subtle ways, from head tilt to spine straightness, creating a cohesive visual narrative. This coordinated posture communicates internal consensus, signaling that the family is unified not only in intent, but in emotional approach, ensuring that no single person appears isolated or overwhelmed. Finally, the psychological impact of this message on both the intended recipient and the audience cannot be understated. By combining restraint, micro-expression, vocal control, and synchronized group behavior, the family creates a message that is simultaneously urgent, credible, and carefully calibrated. For viewers, it communicates resilience and strategy. For the unseen recipient, it conveys acknowledgement and responsiveness. This is not a simple plea. It is a complex, multi-layered communication where every gesture, pause, and subtle inflection carries weight, shaping perception and influence in ways words alone could never achieve. Overall, these patterns of restrained emotion, deliberate pauses, micro-expressions, and synchronized posture combine to produce a message that is far more than words on screen. The family's communication suggests a calculated balance between conveying urgency and maintaining composure, a balance that indicates both awareness of an unseen audience and the understanding that their actions now carry psychological weight. This is a family not just speaking, but negotiating the emotional terrain of hope, fear, and strategy simultaneously.